Hello, welcome back. I'm your host Teresa, and today's topic is the top 10 unsettling facts about the Ming Dynasty. Starting us at number 10 is the Golden Age of Porcelain. I'm the first to say that this won't necessarily be unsettling, but the Ming Dynasty's creation of blue and white porcelain pieces changed our world and created one of the most identifiable styles of porcelain to date, so I should talk about it a little. This Golden Age was from 1402 to 1435, specifically for blue and white porcelain. The blue paint was brought back from ancient Persia by Emperor Zheng after voyages to the west. Expert potters would use local clays and imported Persian cobalt to create some of the Ming Dynasty's most popular trade items and motifs. Some of the pottery and its motifs were actually intentionally made for the export of trade products so they'd appeal more to the Ottoman world and eventually to the Europeans. The first imperial kiln of the Ming Dynasty was built in 1368 and ran until 1644. In fact, China's pottery was so revered around the world that during the Ming Dynasty, when it was at its peak, King Manuel I of Portugal instructed naval man Vasco da Gama to bring back two precious commodities, spice and porcelain. 2 years later, da Gama returned, having lost half his men but holding a dozen pieces of Chinaware. During the chaos following the Ming Dynasty's collapse, exports to Europe were interrupted, spurring the production of Delftware, the blue and white Chinese-style porcelain that's made in Holland. Paper to metal is number 9, how the Ming Dynasty did the reverse of what we've done now. It was pretty unconventional of them to swap from paper currency to metal, and it ended up detrimental to their society. Usually, monetary society starts with coins and graduates to paper money. This did happen in China, with paper money being introduced by the 7th century Tang and 11th century Song dynasties. But in the Ming century, the paper currency was unstable, and that led to it being replaced by coins. They chose to make the coins out of silver because the new demand for Chinese products worldwide led to a large influx of the material, mainly from the Spanish Empire and Japan. Chinese coins had holes in them to be carried easily. People would thread the coins on a string and hang it from their belts. Large payments could be made in strings of 1,000 or 100 coins. But in 1639, there was a trade dispute regarding the treatment of Chinese merchants in the Philippines, which had China's silver supplies cut off. A drop in imports spiked the value of silver, and people began to hoard it, which only exacerbated the crisis. Naturally, the peasants were the worst hit since they paid their taxes in silver while conducting crop sales in copper. This economic crisis, along with the natural calamity, rebellion, and foreign invasion and instability of the court at the time, are the main reasons for the decline of the Ming Dynasty. Let's take a walk! Number 8 is the Great Wall of China, and man is it actually a hike. It's 4,500 miles long and dates way back in the centuries BC when Chinese rulers first built the border fortifications to keep the northern armies at bay. But this technically wasn't built 100% by the Ming, which I'm sure some people were muttering to themselves at home. Rest assured, it's known that between 204 and 201 BC, an earthen Great Wall was built by hundreds of thousands of conscripted workers. It's in the late 1500s, responding to new threats at their northern border, that the Ming emperors began a mission to reconstruct the wall into an impenetrable force. The Ming Dynasty contributed more than any other dynasty to the wall. Most of the wall remaining today was built or repaired by them. It was rebuilt out of local granite, limestone, and fired clay bricks that had sticky rice mixed into them to reinforce their shape. This dirt wall became the taller, thicker, longer wall, featuring integrated watchtowers, barracks, and storehouses. Now for the unsettling part. Over 1 million people died building the Great Wall of China. Archaeologists have found human remains, and as a result, it is being described as the longest cemetery on Earth. Many involved in the construction were Chinese convicts, where labor was used as a punishment, as you may know from our previous Ming Dynasty video. Grieving family members of those who died building the wall would walk the length of it with a rooster in tow. It's believed that this would help release the spirits from being trapped in the structure. Number 7 is how to not rid yourself of a pirate problem: the sea ban. So, the sea ban was not very popular and not very effective, the start to all great stories. The Hongwu Emperor had promoted foreign trade in his time as a young rebel, but as the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty in 1371, he issued the first sea ban, believing this law to protect the national interest and discourage piracy. This ban was so counterproductive to China that the historians have offered other explanations for how and why it would have been kept in place for as long as it was. Because because it couldn't have been deterring piracy, which was now on the rise because of the law. The Hongwu Emperor indicated that the policy was designed to prevent foreign nations from influencing his subject to challenge his rule. Some argue that it was intended to support Hongwu Emperor's printing of coin currency, whose use was continued by his successors as late as the 1450s. Regardless, the attempt to keep pirates out or dissuade influence or whatever resulted with peasants suffering from food and item shortages, and there were seasons when the whole country experienced low resources when weather affected trades. This is because of the loss of income from taxes on trade contributed to chronic funding difficulties throughout the Ming Dynasty and its provinces. By impoverishing and provoking both coastal Chinese and Japanese against the regime, it increased the problem it was purporting to solve. Number 6 is the Founder of Ming. The Ming Dynasty lasted 276 years and is described as one of the greatest eras of orderly government and social stability in human history. This dynasty became a global superpower, undertaking major sea expeditions before Christopher Columbus and producing books before the invention of the printing press in Britain. Natural disasters orphaned Zhou at 16 and led people of China to believe that the Yuan dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven, as explained in our Ming Dynasty traditions video, and it encouraged their uprise on the Mongol leaders. Zhou, who had been a homeless beggar and novice, was the leader of one army formed, and he captured the city of Nanjing in 1358, which he made his capital city. Over 10 years, he defeated rival armies and captured the Yuan capital of Beijing, declaring himself the Emperor of Hongwu in 1368. Having started an orphan and homeless youth, Emperor Ming used the battle to the top and then his status as a way to take his vengeance out on the world. Once emperor, this didn't cease, and he set the standard of unnecessary and crude violence. Hongwu executed an estimated 100,000 people to stifle any opposition, and made it a crime for any official to say anything against him. Anyone he suspected as an opponent was massacred, as was their whole family. He'd even slaughtered an entire neighborhood simply because one resident spoke out against him. He used torture to terrify enemies and commoners alike. He had thousands of concubines killed in his service, including full-scale massacres. When Hongwu was dying in 1398, he even ordered his physicians and concubines to be put to death when he passed. Once forbidden, now free access. It's the Forbidden City in at number 5. And it's not actually free to access. Remember to pay for tickets if you go visit. I just like to rhyme. The Forbidden City was declared a World Heritage Site in 1987, and it's listed by the UNESCO as the largest collection of preserved ancient wooden structures in the world. As China's best preserved imperial palace, it's truly the culmination of traditional Chinese architecture and values. Its construction was ordered in 1406 by Emperor Yongle, and the construction took 14 years. When completed, the emperor moved his capital to Beijing and resided in the palace. This started the tradition of the Forbidden City being the residence of the Chinese emperor and their households, as well as its status as a political center of the Chinese government for over 500 years. 980 buildings, 9,999 rooms, all covering 178 acres of land. Even the roof tiles are glazed and shaped to ensure that birds can't land on them. It's truly just magnificent. And haunted. This place has seen a lot of death and abuse. One legend tells that the Forbidden City has been cursed since Ming Emperor Yongle opened its doors in 1421. He slaughtered over 2,800 concubines when trying to quiet rumors of an alleged sex scandal from when official opening ceremonies were held. A few years after the poor concubines' torturous deaths, a fire ravages the Forbidden City and burns over 250 of the buildings and kills hundreds. Despite the place being covered in lucky charms, they didn't prevent the destruction, and Emperor Yongle sank into a depression, thinking it was a punishment for his actions, until he died in 1424. Number 4 is truly depraved and disgusting human behavior. It's using toilet paper. Cue the cricket sound effect for that one, because the reason for this to be on the list of unsettling facts is similar to how hygiene was on the list for the Vikings video that we recently did on Viking traditions. It wasn't the Chinese who found it unsettling, but outsiders such as Europeans and Ottomans. It's hard to say when it was invented because the Chinese didn't like to talk about toilet paper. Our oldest reference to ancient Chinese toilet paper comes from a scrap segment of a note which says, "Paper on which there are quotations or commentaries from the 5 classics or the names of sages I dare not use for toilet purposes." That means the first mention of toilet paper was from a man begrudgingly deciding not to wipe his butt with the I Ching. Anyways, carbon dating says it was somewhere around the year 600 that this was invented. We only think it's normal now because we're used to it, but it was considered disgusting to everyone when the Chinese began doing it, and they used it a lot. A record from 1393 says the imperial court ordered 72 200,000 sheets in a single year. An Arabic traveler who visited China and saw them use it firsthand wrote in disgust, saying that they are not careful about cleanliness and they do not wash themselves with water when they have done their necessities. They only wipe themselves with paper. To the other countries of the ancient world, using toilet paper was the most disgusting and unsettling human behavior. To us now, it's worth hoarding, as we've learned in the past recent years. Move aside circumcision, it's Enunuchs. In at number 3. I'm gonna butcher this word a lot, so why do a little when you can do a lot? Well, that's an awful pun, but it was kinda taken seriously, as these men were castrated for one of a few varying reasons. Crime and punishment, better work opportunities, more respect. Why would anyone want to do this? Emasculated and castrated men were used by emperors as servants as far back as the Han Dynasty. Because they were castrated, they were physically a little weaker, stopped growing facial hair, and had higher voices, and even when able to engage in intercourse, they couldn't impregnate any women, so they were considered way less of a threat to anyone or anything. And in the Forbidden City, they were used as servants, spies, and workers in the emperor's harem of women. And since being poor in the ancient world was rough, if it would get him a job in the palace, a Chinese peasant would be willing to chop off his own boys. Eunuchs peaked during the Ming Dynasty. At one point, there were 100,000 working across the country, and so many men were castrating themselves that the government was practically chasing them off with sticks. The overflow of viable working men meant a new application process where you paid 200 copper coins and put your name on a list of thousands of men with the chance that you are one of 250 selected for a work position. Most of the men wouldn't get the job, and they would end up begging in the streets or working awkward jobs, knowing the rest of their lives they lost their twins for nothing. Number 2 is the Ming's reputation to torment concubines. The Ming emperors were particularly cruel ones, but their concubines truly faced the worst of their wrath. Some of the emperors had upward of 9,000 of these women, most of which are victims of kidnap, forbidden to leave the gilded prison they shared with other women. It was also a time of foot binding in the Ming Empire, so many women quite literally could not run away. Many nights they were just carried nude to the emperor's chambers. The Hongwu emperor started the empire and started the tradition whereby concubines would be killed, forced to take their own lives, or be buried alive alongside a dead emperor, something his successors upheld until the practice was abolished in 1464. Behind closed doors, Hongwu kept concubines confined and subjected them to torture, as did his successors. They repeated his abusive patterns. As told earlier, Yongle was embarrassed by a concubine choosing an eunuch over him to his impotence. He had 2,800 women from his harem rounded up and killed by slow slicing, just in case any of them knew about what happened. No official records of this exist, only documents from a concubine named Lady Koi, who had been away at the time of the executions and returned to the news. Shortly after, she and 15 other remaining concubines are hung during Yongle's funeral. The 10th Ming ruler grew tired of the concubines and was obsessed with the life of an ordinary citizen. He would slip out at night in disguise and frequent local brothels, but still collected so many concubines they starved to death as there wasn't enough food to feed them. So yeah, the life of a Ming Dynasty concubine was not enviable. And number 1 is funky smells with endocrinology. Urine medicine was something the ancient Chinese more than dabbled with. They managed to invent endocrinology in 200 BC, since the West didn't develop that technology into the 20th century. Accomplishment is a light term. Endocrinology involves separating hormones from the human secretion. In the case of urine, they would gather up 150 gallons of male urine in a large pan and boil it until it evaporated. They learned that it would leave a crystallized hormone called autumn mineral. While it wasn't injectable, it was ingestible, so they took it in pill forms. One medical paper's instructions were that for each dose, take 5 to 7 pills with warm wine or soup before breakfast. They used it as a hormone, and it worked. By the 4th century BC, they developed stool transplants, another medical idea the West didn't discover until the 20th century. China actually developed a whole medical field 2,000 years before the rest of the known and documented world. Still, that means someone thought of boiling urine and eating whatever was left over to see what happened, so you have to question how things like this come to be. Or yellow soup, which was a water mixture mixed with fermented stool of a healthy person. After a bit of boiling, it'd be served to patients. In an awful and ironic way, this worked incredibly well, as the healthy bacteria in the fermented stool got rid of the bad bacteria in a patient's body. The same concept is actually used to treat C. diff, a deadly disease, but in ancient China this was just listed as a diarrhea remedy. And how could I not mention boy eggs, where chicken eggs are soaked in the urine of a prepubescent boy, then boiled, then resubmerged in urine, and preserved in a jar. This is due to the historic belief that urine has various health benefits combined with how eggs were accessible to commoners. And yes, this is still made and served today. Alright, thank you once again for tuning in and giving us a watch. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more Bumblebee content, and comment down below what you'd like to see more of.